Good evening. This is Week in Review. I'm David Smith, and this evening we'll be discussing Karl Marx, communism, and Nancy Pelosi. Good evening. Welcome back. Daniel has returned from his cruise through the Gulf of Mexico, and we're back with you this evening. I'd like to remind you of our Twitter hashtag WIRTV, and also our email address, david@weekinreview.tv. We'd like to hear from you if you have any comments, questions, or observations that you'd like to share with us. We'd be happy to hear from you. Well, Eric, you've been doing a lot of research and writing, apparently on Marx, Karl Marx, the European philosopher who is considered the father of modern communism, or at least socialism.
Yeah. I think philosopher would probably be a term Marx would reject. Marx saw him very much, as his present-day admirers do, as a prophet.
Right?
He did not see himself as a philosopher.
No self-esteem problem there, huh?
No, Marx had no self-esteem problems. He's a fascinating individual, and we're going to get a little bit into his personal life, and then we'll talk a little bit about his ideas and Engels' ideas and how they flowed out in Lenin, and you'll be able to see
I think that would be good. I don't think a lot of people know much other than his name. Most people don't know much about his life at all, which is quite enlightening.
Yeah, his life is totally fascinating. If you ever have a chance to read a good biography, and I'm going to suggest a couple in the show, do it. Karl Marx is an utterly fascinating figure. He was born in 1818, right after the Napoleonic Wars. His father was a lawyer, originally a Jew, but he converted, so religion was never a big force in the family. He converted to Christianity to keep practicing law. But he wasn't a good Jew, and he wasn't really a good Christian either, so it's neither here nor there. And he sent young Karl, he actually spent lots of money on young Karl and sent him to the best schools he could, and Karl Marx became a perennial student.
Did he ever graduate from a university with a degree?
Yes. Oh, yeah, he graduated, yeah. He was a PhD in philosophy. Although he switched around from law to philosophy and languages. He was actually, like I said, he was a perennial student. As we're going to see in Marx's life, he'd do just about anything for money except get a job. But unfortunately, Marx was born...
So the basis of socialism, real hard socialism, is someone else needs to pay, right?
Yes, that's, like I said, we're going to see a lot of these things continuing on to modern day, yes.
So would you say that this could be, in a sense, socialism as Marx advocated, it was actually a reflection of his own life?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. We're going to see how his own personal idiosyncrasies play right into the ideas. But most of the ideas, as we're going to see, are actually Engels' ideas, which he got from John Calvin, which I'm sure you can enlighten us about a little later on. But Marx, he unfortunately was born into the 19th century, the early 19th century, when they still had a romantic notion about opium. You know, this was the age of Coleridge and De Quincey. So he might even have been given it as a child. I mean, they just used opium for everything. As you know, in the 19th century, most medicines didn't really work. They actually had one that worked, so they just started giving it for everything. So Marx developed his spending problem young. We have letters from his father to him about his spending problem.
So that was, the famous quote that we always hear from Marx, that religion is the opiate of the people, wasn't a metaphor. He actually, being an opium addict himself, Uh, he saw religion as being the opiate of the poor people who couldn't afford the real thing.
That's about the size of it. Yeah, he loved opium throughout his life. Never made any serious attempts to get off of it. We will go back to his Jewishness at the end of his life because there's an interesting story. But anyways, sometime during his student period, he became a communist. You know, this was the age of political movements. But communism was very much mixed up with mystical Christianity. Those of you who know about St. Simon and San Martin, it was very much mixed up with Christianity. A matter of fact, if I know a lot of our readers know the Rosicrucians, if during the 16th, 17th century, if you were called a Rosicrucian, it's pretty much what Bill O'Reilly calls a left-wing loon now, a utopian.
I've known a few Rosicrucians in my time, and it seems to be an appropriate analogy.
So like I said, it was equivalent of a left-wing loon. So anyways, he became a communist, and there just weren't that many of them at the time, especially in Germany, so he came to know Fredric Engels. And he also met his wife, Jenny, there, and she was from a good family. And Marx was psychologically abusive to her. I don't think he physically abused her, but he constantly told her how great he was and how little and nothing she was. And she should be fortunate that he even looked at her, you know. Everybody mentions Marx's autocratic personality. He seems to have developed this very early in life.
A little bit of a sociopath, perhaps? Sociopathic?
I don't know, maybe. Yeah, he was a very autocratic personality. The only person that really didn't get it was Engels, because Engels was supporting him, of course. And Marx was smart enough not to, bite the hand that feeds him.
I understand that you were, we were talking a couple of days ago, and you were mentioning that Marx was very resistant to writing Das Kapital.
Oh, very resistant.
Which seemed such an important issue for Engels, but not really for Marx, who didn't really want to write the book.
Not for Marx at all. Well, now actually we'll mention his first book that was written right after his student years while he was still in Europe, continental Europe, before he moved to London. And that's The Poverty of Philosophy. And in this book, very explicitly, he denies the labor theory of value, which most Marxists claim is an invention of Marx. It actually was invented by David Ricardo, came up with the theory, even though it's no good. Marx actually totally refutes it, and before, during, and after.
The founder, or the supposed founder of modern communism, denied one of the fundamental planks of socialism and communism. Let's
give the labor theory of value is the way you make profit is by exploiting the labor of the people under you. That's the only way. But Marx clearly endorses supply and demand all through The Poverty of Philosophy. The price is set by the supply versus the demand. So it might not be the labor, it could be the materials, transportation, anything could make the product more, make the product cost more. But the ultimate determination of price was the demand for it.
That sounds like capitalism to me.
Yeah, it does. It does.
At least that's the way I learned it in school.
Yeah, it sounds suspiciously like capitalism. He's also heartily endorses free trade. He was against all protectionism.
Oh, my.
Yeah, and by the way, in the letter to the Poverty of Philosophy, in most editions, is concluded the letter to Anne and Co., which I highly recommend everybody to read. It's not long, and you can get Marx's reflections on the beautiful aspects of slavery.
Oh, good grief. So essentially, what you're telling is that socialism, as it's attributed to Marx, is actually an invention of Engels.
Yeah.
But Marx sort of had to write the book, and his name was on it, and he became attached to it, even though he was basically a capitalist.
Yeah, he wasn't really a capitalist. No, he was more like he wanted to reduce Marx's vision of communism. Like I said, there was no vision of communism like today. These guys were inventing it. Marx's vision of communism was you're going to make everybody dirt poor.
Well, that seems
and
to
keep
be
them
what
that way.
Obama's trying to do. So.
Yeah, I told you, you're going to see this coming through. That's why the estate taxes and everything are to get rid of the small farmers, because they knew these are the people that were going to fight it. So you see the split. You see it today, like in Thomas Friedman, you know, the New York Times columnist, who seems to be a high-tech utopian. That would be Engels. Even in the Communist Manifesto, you'll see this split between the two writers. On one page, you'll see, you know, that utopia is we're going to have abundance of subsistence, and then a few pages after, you'll see, oh no, we don't want too much subsistence. Well, here's the Engels-Marx split. Another example of this would be Engels says, yes, we intend to abolish all private property. And then you'll see a few pages later, Marx says, well, not all private property. Like the artisan can have a little piece, or maybe a sharecropper, you know. He was very much an admirer of American slavery, by the way.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's equal when you're a slave.
So basically, which form of socialism do you think Marx would have been more in favor of? The sort of light socialism that we've had in America since about the 1913, or the hardline socialism that you find in the former Soviet Union and in Maoist China?
I think he wouldn't approve of any of them too much. I think maybe the Albanian socialism, where, you know, the people are just kept at subsistence level, would be more to his liking. Remember the Soviets were trying to build stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was totally against that. He was totally against innovation. He had strong ties with the Austrian government his whole life. And as everybody knows, they were the most archaic, oldest monarchy in Europe, and he had strong ties. And we'll get to that later, some of the reasons why. But by the way, when France went to war, Bonaparte, who was the progressive leader, went to war against Austria. Marx supported Austria wholeheartedly. Wrote articles in favor of Austria and everything, no doubt. But anyways, he meets his wife, psychologically abuses her, and starts cheating on her immediately. So she knows even when they're engaged that he's not going to be loyal to her. Matter of fact, he even gets their maid pregnant, which he tries to blame on Engels.
Engels, the good Calvinist, right?
Yeah, Engels is a good Calvinist. Remember, Engels he never marries Mary Bird, his mistress, common-law wife, but he's monogamous his whole life.
Yes.
Yes, Engels grew up in a Calvinist background, and I'm going to get some of that from you. You can tell us some of the aspects of Calvinism, the apocalyptic, and the... Yeah, so anyways, after this, they move to London. Marx goes first, and then Engels is pretty much, as father says, you know, you got to stop this crap and get a job. So Engels goes to work at his father's textile mill in England and gets an exorbitant salary, and he supports Marx. And then they start writing Das Kapital, the famous book. And as we were saying, it's written way more for propaganda purposes than political economy or anything else. Marx takes 17 years to write this book because Marx doesn't want to write it. Engels keeps sending letters, you know, I'm kind of going to cut your money off. And, you know, as soon as the money gets cut off, Marx, oh, yeah, I just wrote a few chapters. They're here waiting for you.
The opium supply got cut off. And,
oh, yeah.
It's a strong motivator to get to work writing.
Oh, yeah. Well, he also sends his wife out to beg all of his relatives and her relatives for money. This is constantly happening while he's living in London. Anyways, I think he wants to get rid of her because he's having affairs and cooperating with, you know, the Austrian and Berlin, Prussian police departments to sell his old buddies out. Yes, I know this is going to come to a shock to people, but Marx was a police informer also. And he wasn't only a police he wasn't only a police informant. He'd make sure to write his old buddies and tell them, you got to republish the most incendiary material, so when the police raided, they'd get evidence. Well, we're not claiming Marx was dumb,
No.
So this is one of the other reasons he keeps strong ties with the Austrian monarchy. At least the kind of shadowy secret police part of the Austrian. And he also writes articles in favor of Austria for various publications that are ghost-written throughout Europe and America. So, and he has 3 daughters that live while he's in London using prestigious amounts of opium. I mean, he goes through millions of dollars. In today's
millions
currency,
of dollars in that era. That's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, and they're not breeding horses or collecting diamonds. No, he's spending it on opium, and his wife, like a lot of psychologically abused wives, has a spending problem. The problem is buying out everything she can. But this works for Marx's benefit because he just sells it and pawns it when they run out, So he goes through the equivalent of millions of dollars in London. And finally he does finish Das Kapital, and of course nobody wants to publish it. But it finally makes its way to Russia. But anyway, let's go into a little bit about Marx's personal life in London. He has 3 daughters, and 2 of them commit suicide. There's strong evidence that he sexually molested. There's overwhelming evidence that he sexually molested his youngest daughter. And by the way, he defends incest in his writings quite commonly because he's a primitivist.
It seems to be a terrible flaw in socialist philosophers and leaders. I mean, you had Hitler and his niece. This just seems to be...
Yeah. Well, this is part of the Calvinism. You can't go to heaven, but you can have lots of sex while you're here on Earth,
Yeah.
So, like I said, as we're going to get to, the institutes of religion, this is sort of Calvinism turned inside out. So, as we know, Marxism, it's very apocalyptic, and everything's preordained. You want to add a little bit here on the Calvinism for us?
If Engels was a Calvinist, and this kind of I was talking with you about how this would explain why he was so insistent that Marx write this book, because you have to have this text, as Calvinists had to have the Bible as it's a religion based on a text. The text becomes God. It replaces the mystical idea of God. It's
kind of like the Koran's the paper.
Yeah, the Koran in Islam you have the Talmud in Judaism. But you can't just have the text. You have to have the interpreter of the text, and that's that's where Das Kapital comes in. It acts as the final arbiter and interpreter of.
I understand.
So it's essentially social communism is essentially a religion. Despite its profession of atheism, it's a religion. And it has its apocalyptic scenarios, and it has its you have to believe the core doctrine, and
so the
you can't be a heretic.
They even call each other heretics.
Yeah. So it's,
well, the utopian, I guess, would be like the old Christian idea of God's city on earth, right?
Yeah. Well, you start this. This goes back to, when Christ didn't return, within about 300 years, St. Augustine writes The City of God, which explains how the church is going to be the city of God on earth for 1,000 years. Well, of course, the 1,000 years goes by and Christ doesn't return. And then you have the Protestant Reformation. And you have John Calvin writing the Institutes of Religion, which is supposed to be the text to guide for the next 1,000 years. And then you wind up, nothing happens, and you wind up with Das Kapital. and then nothing happens, and you wind up with Hitler writing Mein Kampf, and proclaiming the 1,000-year Reich, and now you have the fundamentalists here in America who are waiting for, So it just keeps going on. It's.
A lot of this conflict is a battle of hierarchs. The one thing a hierarch hates more than anything is another hierarch.
Yes. It just goes from one to the next. I'm wondering where the next one's going to be. What is the next one going to be?
I understand John Calvin also had an extremely intolerant personality.
Yes, he was very intolerant. In fact, if you want, people talk about how evil the Roman Inquisition was. Well, you want to go live in Geneva when John Calvin was in charge. They burst in your door, just like the NKVD. They burst in break down your door and without any warning, wanting to know what are you doing. The sneaking suspicion that someone might be having fun. So.
Yeah, so we can see the parallels. Like I said, the parallels are going to become evident through all this.
Oh yes, it's just this is. Engels just took Calvin's Institutes of Religion and transferred them into a system that's devoid of any supernatural content. It's all materialism, but it's still a religion with all the aspects of.
Yeah. And we noticed that a lot of modern-day leftists also have spending problems. Spending problems, drug problems, and sex problems.
Yeah, that does seem to be we notice that comes up with every leftist administration.
Yeah.
I mean, they just...
So I think if Karl Marx was alive today, he'd be on Dr. Drew every season. But anyways, let me get to Marx's third book I want to talk about. That's the Critique of the Gotha Program, and here we're going to bring in Nancy Pelosi, the minority leader of the House. In the Gotha Program, Marx is very against religious freedom, as we all know. But we'll get to his one episode of religion at the end of his life. He's very against religious freedom. So he says there can't be any freedom of conscience. Does this remind us of somebody today?
Oh, yeah, we've been listening for the last several weeks as Nancy Pelosi leads the charge against freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. With this Sandra Fluke thing and bringing up contraception. And I have to admit, though, I'm just the response of the Catholic bishops is astounding. You want to talk about Marxist infiltration socially into the Catholic Church. These men should be. This isn't an issue of contraception. This is an issue. This whole issue, this contraceptive pill, supposedly, is an abortifacient. The bishops aren't even addressing the correct issue. We're dealing with abortion here, not with, with the use of a condom or something.
So this is very important to leftists, is to get rid of freedom of conscience.
Well, yeah, you can't have anyone who... Well, because, again, the state becomes the God.
Becomes God, yeah.
Becomes God, and you can't have anyone competing with the state. You can't have your own opinion.
I want to ask you, you're very erudite in church history and theology. Aside from the late 20th century and the early 21st century, is there any period in the church's history where Nancy Pelosi would be considered a Christian?
No.
None.
No. When you openly question, contest, and publicly, do so publicly, fundamental doctrines of faith, you are a heretic. And by definition, a heretic is removed from the communion of the church. You are no longer a Catholic.
So even
you can call yourself one, but you're not.
Even the first and second century, she wouldn't have been considered a Christian.
Oh, no. She would not. She wouldn't have been. The only time that she would have been considered a Christian was after 1965.
Yeah.
Or 1968. Before that, no, she never would be.
No.
No.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's what I figured. I figured that Nancy Pelosi, because I'm going to coin a new term here, well, we actually coined it together, me and David, is a termite.
Yes. She's burrowing into the church, and they're doing it quite effectively. These people who, Sebelius, Pelosi, all these, what do they call it? Concerned Catholics or Catholics for Common Ground or something. They're all heretics if they ever were Christians to begin with. Christian doctrine is pretty easy to find out what it is. It's not something you make up on the spot.
Yeah. So basically, they just joined these groups or didn't leave them just to destroy them from the inside, right? To hollow them out.
Yes. That's exactly what they're doing, and that's exactly what this whole issue has been over the past several weeks. Is they're trying to create what's called a secondary magisterium, or an alternative. The magisterium is the bishops controlling doctrine and practice, which they're the only ones authorized to do so. But you have these people who come in and try and slowly undermine it. It's taken about 50 years. They're coming up to the golden anniversary of Vatican Council II, and that's where it all started. People got in, and, the socialists, well, probably in the 40s they got in there. But no, these people are just
well,
as you said, termites. No.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi, I think, definitely could be a Marxist, though.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, if you listen to her, yes. It's quite obvious that she and the entire current administration are socialist.
Yeah.
And they're turning us from the soft socialism that we've had since, at least Truman, for certain, or FDR. Let's go back to 1932. And we've had this soft socialism that, people were able to deal with it. But now this is it's taking a hard left turn, and it's becoming a hardened socialism. They want us to be a European socialist state.
Okay, I just want to get two more points in about Marx, and then we're going to move a little bit to Lenin. Another thing is we've all read Marx is famous, where you can herd cattle in the morning and plant crops in the evening. See, Marx was in favor of amateurism. He didn't want professions, because that's another thing that divides people. But do you think a lot of Marxists today would like to go to an amateur dentist?
I don't think so.
Or amateur eye surgeon?
No, that would be...
No.
Well, no, I've noticed, especially with this Obamacare, this socialist health plan, it's divided into three categories, apparently, for treatment. Those who are, of the appropriate socialist persuasion will get good care. Everyone else will be left with this, if you can sort of afford it, or you're important, and sort of this median care. And those who are considered useless eaters, the sick, the diabetic, the so on, they're just going to kill you off.
Yeah. What would Calvin do to non-Calvinists in Geneva?
Right, burn you at the stake.
Burn you.
Yeah.
So basically, he just got rid of the problem by killing them.
Yeah, either either kill you or exile you. You'd be sent off into exile, exiled from Geneva.
Okay. And the other thing about Marx is, and I'm going to give this story some credence, and I'll tell you why. At the end of his life, his maid said she saw him praying in front of a menorah. And the thing that gives this credence is she said he seemed to have some sort of weird ties around his arm and his head.
Oh, phylacteries.
Yeah, she didn't know what they were. That's why I give this story some credence. So this is very much in the Jewish tradition.
So at the end of his life, he went back to being a somewhat of an observant Jew in secret.
Well, in secret, yeah, very secret.
Yeah.
And when we say the end of his life, we're talking about the last month at the most.
Yeah. somewhere where, well, you get to the point, and no atheists in foxholes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
So yeah, now we're pretty much finished with Karl Marx. I mean, he's, like I said, fascinating figure. I encourage everybody to read up on him and read his Poverty and Philosophy.
Well, I'm glad you covered it, because I'll tell
you,
in all my time in college and school and everything else, we got the philosophy of communism. We covered it, but we never covered Marx's actual life. And you're right, when you look at his life, it's like, good grief, this is just replicated in the lives of most hardcore socialists.
Yeah, and and what most of the ideas we know as Marxism are Engelsism.
Yeah.
That's why there's that famous quote at the end of his life when Marx said, "If anything is certain, it's that I am not a Marxist."
Yeah, certainly the doctrine of Marxism is Engels, but the practice of Marx, in many of the personal life, is definitely Marx.
Yeah, it's definitely Marx. And it's interesting that we've actually tracked down the pedigree of these ideas to John Calvin.
Yes, back to which was and I found that rather fascinating. That when you think about it, and if you know anything about church history or European history, it explains the need for the book, and it explains the hardcore religious aspects of Marxism, as it's so-called Marxism.
Yeah, so it's very much because of Engels' upbringing as a Calvinist.
It's just a materialist religion.
Yeah.
That has its.
So let's now move to. It's not Marx's. Marx never met him, but Engels probably did. Was Lenin.
Oh.
Lenin somehow by good luck and hook and crook manages to take over Russia.
Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov.
And one of the first things he does is introduce a new currency, time certificates. You work 2 hours, you get certificates for 2 hours of trade. So the alert listener can probably already see the trouble with this, or anybody who's worked.
Well, this is a little bit different than Hitler's labor treasury certificates, right?
Yeah.
Because he managed to bring Germany out of an ungodly depression.
No. This is just going to make things worse. So you have two craftsmen that make the same chair. One makes it in 2 hours, one makes it in 6 hours. Who gets the more certificates?
Yeah. So it's.
You can see the trouble with this already. The guys that are goofing off end up with way more labor certificates than the people that are working.
I had a friend who went to St. Peter, or to, I think when it was. So was it Leningrad that was St. Petersburg?
Yes.
Leningrad. He went to Leningrad. This is when it was still Soviet. And he was touring, I think, the Winter Palace. And there was a man sitting in front of a door at a desk. And he just happened to walk over. He was looking at the mirrors and so on, all the beautiful architecture. He walked over to the man and he said, what is it that you do here? And he said, well, I make sure that no one comes in or out of that door. He says, well, how many people have tried today? He says, no one ever comes in or out of that door. It's nailed shut from the other side. This is why there's no unemployment in Soviet, but he had a job, but it was, can you imagine anything more mind-numbing than doing that for, your whole life?
I'm thinking the Walmart reader.
I've heard the unofficial motto of the Soviet worker was they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. But anyway, so Lenin takes over. This becomes a disaster. The country goes bankrupt. So Lenin decides to cure this by just abolishing money, which almost drives the country back to the Stone Age, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Because Lenin has a spending problem, too, not in his personal life, but in his public life. And do we see this anywhere today?
Well, yeah, we can look at our own...
we see this maybe in our president. Do we have a leader? Can we pick a leader who has a big spending problem today?
Well, you know, I heard just today
You mean
the
just one?
cost of the health care bill was supposed to be 2.1. Actually, it was supposed to be in the billions. It's now been estimated to be $2.1 trillion for all of it, the program and its implementation over 10 years.
And growing.
Now they're actually found out that it's going to be $2.6 trillion with the implementation. The total overall cost is $2.6 trillion. We can't afford it because it's only allocated for a couple of $100 billion.
Yeah, well, let's bring up something interesting we were talking about right before the show. I hope Obama's plan to cure this isn't to abolish our money.
Yeah. Well, you know, when the money becomes absolutely worthless, you know, what do you do?
Yeah, you can always cure the patient by killing him, huh?
Yes. Well, that's the old story. You know, the doctor. The operation was a success. Unfortunately, the patient died.
Died, yeah. Because he told me there's a big alarming trend in Europe and America for prominent bankers to be resigning and leaving.
Well, yeah, that's been very notable. I mean, people are even beginning to comment on it on the internet finally. You know, European and American bankers are abandoning their jobs. You know, resigning.
So you think this might be one of the surprises if Obama gets another term?
Well, you know.
Do you think he's going to try something with the money?
No, I think that's pretty much going to be it if he gets it. Because there's nothing to restrain them at that point. You know, they've already driven the economy to the point where it's ready to collapse.
Let's make another point about the early communist theorists is the estate tax, or the death tax as it's known. Because they tried these little revolutions around the world, you know, in Europe, not around the world, in Europe. They knew that the small farmer was pretty much their biggest enemy to communism. So they figured they had to get rid of the small farms. This is where the estate or death tax comes up.
Yeah.
I know many small farmers in the Midwest feel like this is aimed at them, and they're exactly right.
Oh yeah, they break it up, and then the Monsanto or ConAgra comes in and buys up the farm, and it's state controlled. Of course.
Because communism is really crony capitalism or state capitalism, isn't it? In practice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's tell our listeners of state capitalism. It's a term you're hearing now, and you think it might be something new, but it's not. State capitalism is basically the policy of the British East India Company. You have a home base, and you exploit colonies. You take all the raw materials from the colonies, manufacture it at your home base, and then you ship it back to them at inflated prices.
Which is exactly what the Soviets did and the Chinese are doing.
Yes, the Chinese are doing it a lot more efficiently. And we notice the Chinese, we talk about the IMF. If you're a small country and you want to get some loans to get businesses started, you can go to the IMF. But say you're doing something that's repugnant to civil rights. You have the slave trade of little people or something. So the IMF won't give you money. Well, the Chinese will, but they want concessions very much like a British Commonwealth country after that.
Well, that appears to be where we're going. Well, I'm afraid we've gotten to the end of our time.
And
Thank you for covering that, Eric. It's been very enlightening. It helps to understand who Marx was, who Engels was, the influences on them, and it kind of helps us understand why socialism collapses every time it's tried.
It's been my pleasure.
Okay.
And I want to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day. Happy spring break to everyone who just started it this afternoon. I know we did here in Arkansas. So, I'd like to remind everyone, Eric has a blog, processidealism.blogspot.com. Please go there. He's posted a lot of his writings and reflections. They're very good.
Yeah.
Please read them, comment on them. He'd like to hear from you. Also, we'd like
Oh, there's 3 writings about academics in there: Wittgenstein, David Lewis, and Kane. For anybody who thinks academics are smart, should go read them.
Okay. I'd also like to remind you of Daniel's blog, danielheath.com, and of course our blog here, David at weekinreview.com. Any comments, observations you have. Thank you for joining us. We'll join you again next week with a new topic and some new observations and discussions. I'm David Smith, and this is Week in Review.
Are we there yet? I'm gonna be sick. I have to go to the bathroom. How much further? These are comments of snakes where St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland, literally.